Hey friends, welcome to Ask Farnoosh this Friday. Before we get into the show, a little favor to ask you. As many of you know, So Money is finally on the YouTube. After 11 years of podcasting, here we are. I've entered a world of cameras, lighting, thumbnails, and trying not to freeze on the most awkward facial expression imaginable. I have many of them. If you're already subscribing, thank you. If not, I would love to see you hit that subscribe button. We're posting full episodes and eventually clips from the interviews, and now these Friday Ask Farnoosh episodes as well. So if you're someone who likes to watch your podcasts, they're called vodcasts now, while you're folding laundry or working out or just, pretending to work at your desk, come on over to YouTube. It's a friendly place for the most part. And speaking of cameras, I had one of those moments this week that honestly, it made me stop and appreciate how quickly life moves. I brought my daughter Colette, who's 9, to the Today Show yesterday. Now, for me, walking into 30 Rock, it's not exactly new. I've been fortunate enough to appear on the Today Show over 100 times over the years. But bringing her completely changed the experience because suddenly you're seeing it through her eyes and not just the eyes of a TV contributor. And it brought back a flood of memories. The first day I stepped onto the Today Show set, I was 23. And I just started working as a junior reporter at Money Magazine, not as a guest, just there to kind of be there for technical support. And I was tagging along backstage, soaking it all in. I remember one of the producers asked me, "How does it feel to be here?" And I said, quote, "It is so surreal." And then fast forward to yesterday, that was also so surreal. But back when I was 23, that moment, I remember it feeling really enormous because everything was moving fast, producers running places, cameras rolling. I do remember it being kind of quiet and calm in the green room. And even when you went on set, and there were always maybe some celebrities you might spot. I remember one time walking into the green room, the makeup area green room at the Today Show, and Coldplay. The entire band was sitting there on the couch resting before they were going to go on to and perform on the plaza. I nearly passed out. And I remember getting my hair done that day, and the makeup and hair people were so used to this stuff. I was like, can you believe it? There's Coldplay. There's Chris Martin. And they're like, who? Who's that? I'm like, okay, you're just pretending. Okay. Like, come on. And then to fast forward a little bit, from that first time I stepped onto the Today Show at 23 years old, I was invited back a few years later for my first appearance. Meredith Vieira was the anchor. I was terrified. I wrote all about it in A Healthy State of Panic. I did embarrass myself, but they did ask me back as well. So I guess I paid the price. And over the years, thankfully, those nerves settled. I became more comfortable. And I've been back, as I mentioned many times, to talk about recessions and retirement and student loans, inflation. Television became part of my job. But somehow bringing Colette this week made it all feel brand new again. She met Dylan Dreyer. She met Savannah Sellers, who's been a guest here on So Money. She met Al Roker, who somehow manages to be exactly as warm and funny off camera as he is on camera. And he took some time with her. He really asked her about her summer and how it's going. I don't think she understood the enormity of the moment. I did. And I kept trying to explain it to her in the car. I'm like, did you know Al Roker is really, really, really famous? He's one of the most popular hosts and longstanding hosts of the Today Show. She's like, yeah, I knew that. And so anyway, before we left, the producer invited Colette to sign one of their backstage walls. A lot of guests and visitors do this, and it's become a little unofficial guest book over the years. And so she grabbed the Sharpie and confidently wrote, Colette Tarabi. And here's the funny part. Tarabi is not her legal name. She has my husband's last name. So I asked her, why did you write Tarabi? It's the first time you've ever thought to do something like that. And she didn't miss a beat. She looked at me and said, because then everyone will know I'm your daughter. And that's a fair point. And it was pretty heartwarming, I have to say. I did also laugh because it was such a kid answer. Practical, efficient, completely unconcerned with legal names or paperwork. Like in her mind, she was simply helping future people connect the dots. And that's my daughter. She's a helper. All right. Speaking of paperwork, that little visit ended up sparking another conversation that I want to share with you, which is putting your kids on your company's payroll and opening up a Roth IRA for them. It's a loophole. And in fact, I just had this conversation with my accountant last week where Have you thought about maybe adding your kids to your payroll simply so that you can open a Roth IRA for them and take advantage of this incredible retirement tool earlier on as possible? So yes, the answer is yes. She's increasingly helping me with my business, with So Money, with social media, photography. She's actually doing some field reporting right now for me for the Montclair Pod. She goes up to people now and she asks them questions, and she's learning how to do the interview on the spot. I'm trying to create a succession plan. In the meantime, I'll be paying her, and part of that will go into a Roth IRA. If you own a business and your child performs legit work for your business, you can pay them a reasonable wage. And I want to emphasize two words: legitimate and reasonable. The IRS is not interested in parents inventing imaginary jobs for their kids just to shelter money. Your kid has to actually do work. And, so maybe they're modeling in your marketing photos. Maybe they're appearing in social media videos. Maybe they're helping organize your office and open up your mail, file your paperwork, test products. The work has to be real. It has to be documented and appropriately compensated. And then once they're earning that income, they can then become eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA. And adults always ask me, well, what's the best investment, Farnoosh? And most of the time they're asking about the best stock picks or ETFs or real estate. But honestly, I think the greatest investment advantage any of us can ever have isn't picking the perfect stock. It's time. And time is what does the heavy lifting. If your child starts contributing even a few $1,000s to a Roth IRA at 9 or 10, that money could have 50 or 60 years to compound. That's extraordinary. We spend our midlife wishing we had started earlier. And here's an opportunity to give our kids something we can't give ourselves anymore, which is decades. It's also a reminder that some of the best financial gifts we can give our kids aren't things that they're going to appreciate today. Colette would probably rather have another American Girl doll than a Roth IRA. But in 30 years, I have a feeling she'll be much happier that we chose the Roth IRA. That will buy her many more American Girl dolls if that's her thing. All right, we have an interesting show today, and I'm going to be answering one question from the audience, but it's a really, really meaty one. I'm going to tell you what it is in a second. It has to do with a lot of aspects of life. But first, some news. We're going to talk about what's been catching my eye in the news, unpacking it with you, and telling you why it's somewhat important. So the first is a study on money and brain health. The findings were published in the journal Innovation and Aging. And while some of the headlines made it sound a bit sensational, like suggesting that money problems can age your brain, the actual takeaway is much more nuanced and more interesting. So here's what happened. Researchers followed nearly 2,000 people in Britain over the course of several decades. They tracked participants' household incomes, asked whether they struggled to pay bills or meet everyday financial obligations, and then years later, they measured their memory, their processing speed, and overall cognitive function. Eventually, many participants even underwent brain scans in their late 60s and early 70s. What the researchers found was that people who experienced persistent financial hardship earlier in adulthood generally performed worse on cognitive tests later in life and showed more signs of age-related changes in their brains. The association was especially pronounced among men, something researchers believe may reflect the social expectations that are placed on that generation to serve as primary breadwinners, along with higher rates of smoking, drinking, and other health risks. So now, before anyone hears this and thinks, well, great, I'm stressed about money, and so I guess I'm stressed about my brain now. Let's put this in perspective. This study doesn't prove that financial hardship causes cognitive decline. It doesn't mean that if you've had a rough financial patch, you somehow damaged your brain. It just shows an association, not causation. But I do think it reinforces something we've been learning for years, which is that financial stress matters. It doesn't stay neatly confined to our wallets. It does have a way of spilling over into every other part of our lives. Let's just think about what chronic financial stress looks like. It's lying awake at 2:00 in the morning, replaying the same numbers in your head. I have been there. It's constantly wondering whether you'll have enough to cover the unexpected expense that's happening around the corner. It's putting off doctor's appointments because you're worried about the bill. It's staying in a job that's draining you because leaving is not financially possible. Those experiences take a toll, not because fear itself is bad. In fact, as I've written extensively, fear often serves an important purpose. It gets our attention. It motivates us to prepare. It pushes us to act. The challenge is when financial stress becomes constant. and it leaves us feeling like we're always operating in survival mode. And that's one of the reasons I'm such a believer in emergency savings. Not because I expect everyone listening to face a financial crisis tomorrow, but because savings create breathing room, they create options. So to bring it back to this study and what it's teaching us, what we can at least take away is that when something unexpected and difficult with your money happens, and something eventually will, having cash reserves you the time to think about what to do next instead of forcing you into an immediate reaction. This is going to come up later when we help out one of our audience members. When you have cash, you have options. You can compare your choices. You can ask better questions. And that to me is one of the most underrated benefits of financial security. It's not just what money allows you to buy, it's what it allows you to avoid and mull over. Now, speaking of our health, New Jersey Senator Andy Kim made the news this week, introducing legislation that I think deserves some attention. He is one of my senators here in New Jersey, and this is important, especially if you're raising kids or planning to start a family, and it could potentially affect not just New Jersey, but the entire country. The proposal is called the Healthy Kids Act, and its goal is very straightforward. Let's make sure every kid in America has health insurance. Specifically, this would require every state to offer Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, to all children whose families earn up to 400% of the federal poverty level. Right now, eligibility varies dramatically depending on where you live. Some states have expanded coverage, others don't, and families can find themselves earning just enough to lose access to affordable insurance while struggling to still pay for private coverage. If you've ever been in that position, you know how frustrating this can be. On paper, your income suggests you're doing okay, but in reality, you may be staring at premiums that cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars a month before you've even gone to the doctor, paid a single medical bill. It's one of those cliffs in our financial system that does not get enough early attention. And the timing of Senator Kim's proposal is not by accident. Earlier this month, Congress approved changes to Medicaid that are expected to reduce federal spending on the program over the next decade. The Congressional Budget Office estimates those changes could leave millions more Americans without health insurance. Now, Senator Kim has been on this podcast focusing more on the sandwich generation, aging parents, how to afford healthcare for your elderly parents who've suddenly gotten sicker and need medical attention. How do you qualify for Medicaid? What about long-term health insurance? So I'll link to that episode in our show notes. But right now, his attention is turning to the younger generation. Whether this bill moves forward, I think it does raise an important question. What kind of safety net do we want for families? You know, as someone who spends all day talking about personal finance, I recognize the limits of personal financial advice. I can tell you to build an emergency fund. I can encourage you to invest consistently. You know, I will tell you to be disciplined with your budget, but there are some expenses that are simply too large for most families to absorb on their own, and healthcare is one of them. Health insurance is not just a healthcare issue, it's a financial planning issue. We'll see what happens with Senator Kim's bill. Like so many proposals in Washington, it will face an uphill climb, but I think it's worth paying attention to because it highlights something we don't discuss enough. Sticking with families for a minute, because another story caught my eye this week, and on the surface, it sounds a little funny, but underneath it is a much bigger conversation about how expensive it has become to raise children. And the headline was essentially this: baby registries aren't just for babies anymore. Traditionally, a baby registry was pretty predictable. Friends and family bought you diapers and bottles and a stroller, a crib, maybe one of those wipe warmers that we lived by when our kids were little. But increasingly, parents are using registries for things that aren't products at all. They're asking for meal delivery subscriptions, house cleaning services, postpartum doulas, lactation consultants, even contributions toward childcare. And honestly, that's brilliant, because if you've ever had a newborn, you know what you don't need more of, and that's tiny shoes. You know what you do need? Sleep, food, an extra pair of hands. And this is not stuff you can find on Facebook Marketplace. It is not a hand-me-down, right? These are the things that you have to buy fresh and new. You have to resource. The story also reflects something much larger that's happening in the economy. Parents are becoming less interested in accumulating stuff and they're more interested in buying back time. And that is a really interesting shift. For decades, we've treated consumer spending as a way to own more things, but increasingly people are spending money to outsource tasks that drain their energy or consume their limited free time. Think grocery delivery, lawn care, meal kits, cleaning services, dog walking, and of course, childcare. Now, I'm well aware that not everyone has the budget to hire help. Childcare alone has become one of the biggest expenses that families face. And depending on where you live, infant care can easily rival the cost of college tuition or your mortgage. So when I say buying back time, I don't mean spending recklessly. I mean thinking creatively about what support would actually make your life easier if people were already asking, "Hey, what can I get you? Congrats. What can I get you?" Maybe here's my fund for my future childcare. Instead of receiving 12 adorable blankets, you ask relatives to chip in for a month of grocery deliveries, or maybe your coworkers pool their money toward a cleaning service instead of another stuffed animal. Maybe grandparents help cover a week of daycare. Those gifts may not photograph well, but I guarantee they'll be remembered a very long time. And finally, I want to leave you with a piece I read this week in the Washington Post that I immediately bookmarked because it challenged a lot of the assumptions we tend to make about retirement. And rather than offering another checklist of how much you should have saved by age 40 or 50, she asks a much more interesting question. What do people consistently get wrong about retirement? And one of the biggest takeaways is that retirement is not a finish line. We often imagine it as this magical destination where one day we're going to wake up, we're going to stop working, and everything will suddenly become easier and more relaxed. Endless vacations. But the reality for many people is a lot more complicated. Retirement is not simply a financial transition, it's an identity transition. You're giving up routines and relationships and purpose, and often a version of yourself that existed for decades. And I think that's something we underestimate. I've interviewed thousands of people over the years, from financial planners to psychologists to retirees, and one theme comes up again and again. The people who seem happiest in retirement are not necessarily the ones with the biggest portfolios. They're the ones who retire to something rather than simply from something. They have hobbies, they have volunteer work, they have family, they have travel plans, they have community, creative projects. Money makes some of those things possible, but money alone is not the thing that makes you happy in retirement. Another point the article makes is one I find myself repeating constantly. Retirement is almost never a single moment anymore. Increasingly, people are easing into it. They consult, they work part-time, they start passion businesses, they teach, they freelance, and they intentionally earn less, but they still stay engaged. Part of that is financial necessity, but part of it is that many people simply don't want to stop working altogether. They just want more control over how they spend their time. Another truth the article highlights is that healthcare often becomes one of the biggest financial variables in retirement. People spend years obsessing over whether they'll have enough money to travel or spoil their grandkids, but they underestimate how much they'll eventually spend on healthcare. There are estimates out there that the average retired couple may need hundreds of thousands of dollars just to cover healthcare costs throughout retirement. That's with having Medicare. And it's also before considering long-term care, which Medicare does not cover. The article also challenges the idea that retirement automatically costs less than working. Yes, some expenses will disappear. You're probably commuting less. Maybe you're no longer buying work clothes or paying for lunches downtown every day, but other costs go up. You may have more free time to fill. So you travel more, you take up hobbies, you visit family. Maybe you decide to renovate the house that you've been living in for 30 years. So don't assume that retirement is necessarily cheaper. It's just different. And that's why we've talked about on this show that a good rule of thumb for how much you quote unquote need to earn in retirement, at least in the beginning of retirement, is about 80% of your income going into retirement. If your expenses going into retirement are averaging about, $10,000 a month, it's not like you need now only $5,000 a month in retirement, right? You probably need close to that 10,000 for a while before you start to gradually shift your lifestyle and find some ways to save. And finally, I think this might be my favorite point. The article reminds readers that there is no perfect retirement number. And I know people desperately want one. And we see the news stories like average retirement, average nest egg required in retirement, 1.4 million. It's an ongoing process of asking yourself, does my savings support the life that I want to live? That's a much better question because if your vision of retirement changes, and for most people it does, your financial plan should adjust with it. I think that's what ties together all of today's stories, actually, whether we're talking about opening a Roth IRA, building emergency savings, making healthcare more accessible, asking for support instead of stuff at a baby shower, or preparing for retirement. The common thread isn't really investing, it's optionality. And with that, let's turn to today's listener question because it is such a good example of someone trying to make one of the biggest financial decisions of her life. We have Kristen in the audience who is hitting me up again after 4 years, which I love because it just means that personal finance isn't something that we solve once and then move on from. And I'm so grateful that she has stuck with us all of these years. But here's her question at this juncture in her life. So Kristen is married. She and her husband are 38 years old. They have a 16-month-old. Her husband currently makes $200,000 a year plus bonuses, and she was making $80,000 a year, but was recently laid off with 3 months of severance. Her family's goal is to have another child, and they need to go through a fertility clinic again, like they did with their first. Unfortunately, a relative, she said, was recently diagnosed with an aggressive cancer, and they're expected to inherit anywhere from 500 to 800,000 in the next year. She says, we also have a house that needs about 300,000 in renovations. We are struggling with where to put our finances. Any help would be very much appreciated. She says, my goal right now is to find a new job with the same pay, but the job market seems to be tough at the moment. Yeah, it certainly is tough. And here's a quick overview of the family finances. In their 401k, they have about 200,000 combined. Their only debt is a mortgage, which has a 2.9% interest rate, and they've made a pretty good dent in it. They have about $285,000 left on the mortgage. Savings, $180,000 liquid. They live in Connecticut, and their daycare currently is over $2,400 a month. So again, Kristen, welcome back. I love that we are able to help you once again. Before I get into the financial side of all of this, I want to acknowledge the feelings and the emotions. I'm very sorry to hear about your relative. Inheritances are always bittersweet because they're born out of loss. This isn't just bonus money, right? It's not like winning the lottery. It's someone else's lifetime of work and saving now becoming part of your family's future. And I can hear that you really do want to honor this. So the question isn't simply how should we spend it? It's how do we want to cherish this and do something really meaningful with this. The other thing that struck me as I read your question is that you don't actually have a money problem. You have a priorities problem. And that's a good problem. You've done a lot of things right. At 38 years old, you and your husband have nearly 200,000 in retirement savings, no consumer debt. You have a mortgage at 2.9%, which I would argue is one of the best financial assets you own. You have 180,000 in savings. You're in one of the most expensive parts of the country, the East Coast. Daycare is costing you nearly $2,500 a month, and you're navigating the uncertainty of a layoff. So that is a lot on your plate. But when I zoom out, I don't see a family that's financially fragile. I see a family that's standing at a crossroads with a few good options. And they're hard financial decisions to make because this isn't just a one and done. There isn't one obvious right answer. What I also hear in your question is something I see a lot when people receive a windfall. They start to immediately think about what the money can afford them. A renovation, fertility treatments, investing, maybe pay down debt, which in your case is not really an issue. But I think that's sometimes not the best place to start. So before we decide where the money goes, we need to decide what we want the money to accomplish. Every dollar needs a job before it has a destination. And that's the conversation that maybe you want to start having if you haven't already with your partner. It's multiple conversations potentially, but some of the questions to bring to that conversation. If this inheritance could somehow speak 20 years from now, what would we want it to say? Would we want it to say, I helped us become parents again? Or I gave us financial security? Or I paid for a beautiful home? Or maybe it sounds like, I helped us retire early. Because the reality is $1 cannot do all four jobs equally well. Every financial decision is ultimately a decision about priorities. So the first thing I want to tell you is don't spend tomorrow's money today. You expect to inherit somewhere between $500,000 to $800,000, but it's still an expectation, not a reality. Estates take time, life gets complicated, numbers can change. And until that money is sitting in your account, I wouldn't make any final decisions. I wouldn't hire contractors if you do decide that you want to do the renovation. I wouldn't mentally allocate every dollar. One of the healthiest financial habits you can develop is resisting the urge to spend money that technically is not yours yet. Instead, continue making decisions based on the life that you have today, not the one you expect to have next year. And speaking of right now, let's talk about your current financial picture because I actually think you're underestimating one of your greatest assets. You mentioned having $180,000 in savings, almost like an afterthought, like you put it on this list, but that's not just cash. That is freedom for your family right now. It's buying you something incredibly valuable, time, time to look for the right job, instead of taking the first offer because you're scared. It's giving you time to be selective, time to negotiate. We often think cash isn't working hard enough because it's not earning stock market returns, but cash has another purpose. It reduces anxiety. It gives us optionality. It allows us to make thoughtful decisions instead of desperate ones. So I would protect that cash, which is giving you flexibility. Now, let's talk about the goals themselves. You mentioned a $300,000 renovation. You mentioned your job search. You mentioned daycare. But the thing that seemed to carry the most emotional weight in your question, I'm going to guess, is your desire to have another child. If I asked you to rank your priorities, not with your calculator, but with your heart, I'm going to guess that the answer probably isn't, I really hope I get a new kitchen. It's, I really hope our family grows. And I think that's an important distinction because fertility is one of those rare financial investments where timing genuinely matters, right? Your home renovation can wait, but your biology cannot. And one of the greatest gifts that this inheritance can give you maybe is not a bigger kitchen or a nicer countertop. It's the ability to pursue another round or two rounds of IVF without every appointment becoming accompanied by the question, can we afford this? Right? The money's not going to guarantee an outcome, but it can at least remove a layer of stress from an already emotional experiences. And I would challenge the renovation itself, not because I don't think you should do it, but because I want you to separate what the house really needs from what you want it to become. Every homeowner, myself included, can create a $300,000 wish list if given enough time. The better question is whether every one of those dollars is solving a problem. So I would sit down with a contractor, or maybe you talk to several contractors and ask them to categorize every project into three buckets. What is essential for safety or maintenance? What meaningfully improves your family's life in the home? And what is just cosmetic? Those are three very different categories. And maybe you'll find that you could spend just $150,000 sooner than later to enjoy the home a lot and revisit the remaining projects in 3 or 4 years down the road. A renovation doesn't just cost what you write on the check today. It also costs whatever that money could have become if it stayed invested. And that's where I think the conversation gets interesting because let's imagine just for illustration that you inherit $700,000. You set aside money for fertility, you preserve your emergency fund, you decide to spend, let's say, $150 instead of $300 on the renovation. Suddenly you have roughly $400,000 available to invest. And that money earning an average annual return of, let's just be conservative, 7% over the next 25 years. And of course, that's not guaranteed. Markets will fluctuate. That $400,000 could grow to more than $2 million. Think about that in 25 years. So you aren't simply choosing between investing and renovating. You're choosing between spending dollars today and giving those same dollars the chance to multiply for decades. That's the opportunity cost, right? Every dollar has only one first job. Once you spend it, it can't also compound. There's another psychological trap that I would encourage you to avoid, and it's something behavioral economists call mental accounting. We treat inherited money differently than money we spent years earning ourselves because it's unexpected. We subconsciously label it as, quote, extra. And once we call that money extra, we become more willing to spend it. So, a simple question I ask myself anytime I get a windfall, whether it's a bonus, a tax refund, I ask, if I had spent the last 10 years working to earn this money, would I still make this purchase? And the answer might change. I think at the very least, the question slows us down and it makes us become a little bit more thoughtful about how we spend. One thing I definitely would not rush to do, and you didn't ask this, but anyone else who might be wondering, don't pay off your mortgage. I would celebrate the mortgage. At 2.9%, it's incredibly inexpensive debt because historically, a diversified portfolio yields much higher long-term returns than 2.9%, even though there are no guarantees and investing always involves risk. But your money has the potential to work harder invested than it does eliminating a loan that costs you less than 3% a year. So, in a nutshell, preserve your cash while you're between jobs because that emergency fund plus your 3-month severance is buying you flexibility during your job search. Maybe you use some of that money for fertility treatments, but when the inheritance arrives, think about earmarking some of that money to pay back yourself for those fertility treatments and having some for a renovation. Whatever's left, maybe you invest that in the stock market so that that inheritance can kind of accomplish a few things in buckets. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. And audience, if any of this sparked questions on your end, or if you have any questions about anything else, you can always email me, farnoosh@somonypodcast.com. You can DM me on Instagram at Farnoosh Tarabi. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hanging out with us, whether you're listening to us in your ears, watching me on YouTube. I appreciate you so much. And I hope your weekend is so money.